Hi everyone! Do we even need an introduction? Let's get started. So for those of you keeping score at home, we are on chapter 8, which is titled Miracles, Signs of God, or Gullibility. Before we even get into it, let's just try to guess what they're going to argue. My guess is it's more reasonable to assume that these quote-unquote signs are from God instead of assuming that everyone's lying. For some reason, that's always the false dichotomy they create, and they being evangelical Christians that I've encountered, and back when I was this type of Christian as well. So that's my guess. What's your guess? Let's check it out. So we have a quote from C.S. Lewis: "If we admit God, must we admit miracle? Indeed, indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain." I don't know if it's a bargain, but anyway. So here's a new section, or a first section, Who Made the Cut? We need to pause for a moment and put together the pieces of the puzzle we've discovered so far. Remember, we're looking for unity in diversity. We're trying to put together the seemingly diverse pieces of life into a coherent picture. So far, our coherent picture shows us that the truth exists and it can be known. Any denial of truth presupposes truth, so the existence of truth is inescapable. And while we can't know most truth absolutely due to our human limitations, we can know many truths to a high degree of certainty, i.e., beyond reasonable doubt. One of these truths is the existence and nature of God, capital G. From the lines of evidence we have reviewed, the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments, we are able to know beyond a reasonable doubt that the theistic God exists who has certain characteristics. From the cosmological argument, we know that God is 1. Self-existent, timeless, non-spatial, immaterial. Since he created time, space, and matter, he must be outside of time, space, and matter. In other words, he is without limits. That is, he is infinite. Number 2, unimaginably powerful, since he created the entire universe out of nothing. We're not going to rehash these arguments. They're just reminding us what they believe they have established. And 3, personal, since he chose to convert a state of nothingness into the time-space material universe, an impersonal force has no ability to make choices. From the teleological argument, we know that God is, number 1, supremely intelligent, since he designed life and the universe with such incredible complexity and precision. You know, if you are watching the video, you'll see that I had to pause and add glasses because I'm having a hard time reading this. That's incredibly precise. Thank you, God. And number 2, purposeful, since he designed the many forms of life to live in this specific and ordered environment. And from the moral argument, we know that God is absolutely morally pure. He is the unchangeable standard of morality by which all actions are measured. This standard includes infinite justice and infinite love. Okay. Again, we're not going to go over them again. If you want to check that out, that's in the previous chapters. Theism is the proper term to describe such a God. Now here is the amazing truth about these findings. The theistic God we have discovered is consistent with the God of the Bible, but we have discovered him without the use of the Bible. Okay. I mean, you know, I would argue with that because they started with this idea of a single God. That was an argument that I made in one of the previous videos. And I've also made this argument, I think it was in that video I did about Islam with Ali Dawah. And we went over this idea of why can't this be a God that is a weaker God, and there are other gods that also exist. So this idea that we started off with a single God that is all-powerful, this definitely is inspired by the Bible. Perhaps they didn't use a biblical verse, for example, but they did use this idea. They came at it already with this assumption that it's going to be a single God. This God has to not exist in our time, but can influence our time. It's basically the characteristics of the God in the Bible. That's what they were seeking to justify without use of the Bible. And instead with use of things like making assumptions and considering that a good argument. We have shown that through good reason, science, and philosophy, much can be known about the God of the Bible. In fact, this is what the Bible itself says in Psalm 19, Romans 1:18 through 20, Romans 2:14 through 15. I guess let's check them out. I'm going to be using the NIV since I know I have viewers from different places and English is not necessarily their first language. I mean, the King James Version is hard for some people that are native English speakers to understand. So we're going to be using this, and it's from blueletterbible.org. It's just a very handy website to use. Psalm 19. For the director of music, a psalm of David. The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hand. So look at the trees. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. So this is the argument I think they were making about our DNA proves God because it's got encyclopedia upon encyclopedia worth of knowledge. So this is basically talking about this, about how God controls everything, God is the creator of law, that sort of thing. He's pure, enduring forever. It kind of summarizes everything that they wanted to say, so that's nice. Romans 1:18-20, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. So just kind of telling us that we're all evil and bad, which I know is what the authors really want to tell us, which we found in their foreword. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. I know that everybody is familiar with this, probably watching this. We've all heard this used on us as atheists, that we can't really be atheists because we really know God, we just reject him, because in Romans it says that we all know God. And this does match what the authors are trying to say as well, that the only reason that an atheist would reject God is because of personal hatred towards God, or wanting to be held accountable. That's how they phrase it a lot of times, and that's how the authors have phrased it in their book. So again, it's, yeah, maybe you didn't use the Bible specifically to talk about God, but all the pieces that you're trying to prove come from the Bible. So I don't think they would try to argue that there's really no true atheist unless the Bible, if the Bible didn't have this in there, I don't think they would be arguing against that. So anyway, and then we have Romans 2:14-15. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. So this again is the argument that the things that we do, or our own moral code, or our desire to be good people, or what we define as being a good person, all of this is actually from God. So even though we claim not to follow God, we're actually following God's prescription for our hearts. So again, this is just what the authors have said, which is, it's a bit, I mean, it kind of proved my point, right? That I'm saying, that I said before we even opened these verses, the authors used other things to try to get us to God, but their idea of God came straight from the Bible. So this just proves my point. Thanks, guys. Theologians call this revelation of God natural or general revelation, that which is clearly seen independent of any type of scripture. Again, I wouldn't argue that this is independent of any type of scripture, because all the things they're trying to prove come from scripture. The revelation of scripture is called special revelation. So we know that through natural revelation, theism is true. This discovery helps us not only to see what the true box top looks like, but what it cannot look like. And the box top they're referring to, if you haven't seen the previous videos or you haven't forgot, they're talking about all the pieces of evidence as pieces of a puzzle, and the way that we put them together helps us see what the puzzle is trying to show us, what image it's trying to show us. And they've made an analogy to a puzzle box top that has the image of the puzzle. Since the opposite of true is false, isn't the opposite of true not true? I'm not a logician, so if you can correct me on that or verify, but I thought that's what it was. The opposite of true is not true. We know that any non-theistic worldview must be false. Or, to put it another way, of the major world religions, only one of the theistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, could be true. All other major world religions cannot be true because they are non-theistic. Now, before you start screaming at the screen, remember their idea of theistic is monotheistic, and their idea of non-theistic includes pantheism, polytheism, and atheism. I don't know why they defined it that way. They just did. I don't know. Can't we put number 4? What is it? Baha'i. Number 5, Zoroastrianism. So I think it's kind of silly to limit just these theistic, monotheistic religions. I mean, there was even one where, I don't know if you would consider that worship of only the sun god. Oh, who was that pharaoh? Pharaoh Akhenaten. He was a guy who kind of, the old capital of Egypt used to move back and forth between the upper and lower Egypt, former upper Egypt and formerly lower Egypt, the capitals. So it used to bounce back and forth. And so Akhenaten put it in the middle. And I think it was at Amarna, I think that was the city name. And I don't know if he got rid of the other gods or just said that the sun god is the best. So I'm not sure. But interesting guy. I recommend checking him out. Interesting guy. This may seem like a grandiose claim to deny the truth of so many world religions at this stage, but by simple logic, using the law of non-contradiction, mutually exclusive religions cannot all be true, just as certain football players are rightfully cut from the roster of possible players because they lack the necessary abilities, certain world religions are rightfully cut from the roster of possible true religions because they lack the necessary qualifications. I don't remember going through that. I remember all the things they claimed here, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument. I remember them making those arguments, but I don't remember them ever saying it can only be one God. In fact, I mentioned that at the start of this chapter. So I don't know how they decided Wicca and Taoism and Shintoism, these can't be true. Bizarre. So, and also notice they included Confucianism and secular humanism under a major world religion. So again, I don't know their criteria. They don't really explain it. It's a little weird because these definitions are pretty basic things that they decided for reasons unbeknownst to me. They've decided to just make up their own definition. So something we can all look at, such as a dictionary definition, they've decided to just make it up. So something we could just easily agree is the case, they've decided to choose to believe something else. But we're supposed to then go with them and trust that they have interpreted things spiritual, or they've interpreted things that are a lot more difficult to pin down and say this is the case, or they're not as black and white. So they want us to believe that they can do that when they can't look at something that is black and white and just say, "Yep, let's use this definition." So it's a bit odd. It's a big ask. So logically, if theism is true, remember monotheism, then all non-theisms are false. Now, this does not mean that every teaching of a non-theistic religion is false, or that there's nothing good in those religions. There's certainly truth and goodness in most world religions. It simply means that as a way of looking at the world, i.e. a worldview, any non-theistic religion is built upon a false foundation. While some details might be true, the core of any non-theistic religious system is false. They are systems of error, even though they have some truth in them. So let's see what they mean, because we're getting a for example. All right. Remember, the chapter is about miracles. So, okay. For example, Hindus rightfully teach the truth that you reap what you sow, even though the worldview of Hinduism that you don't really exist because everything is part of one indistinguishable reality called Brahman is false. Okay, so but how did they determine that? They didn't rule this out yet. That everything is, I mean, if God is everything, and that's what they believe, right? God is in everything, He's everywhere, we're all part of God. Don't see how they could outright say this is false without really getting into it. Secular humanists rightfully assert the reality of evil, even though the humanist worldview, which denies an objective standard by which we can detect evil, is false. So again, I disagreed with their objective standard, being God as opposed to anything else. Mormons rightfully teach that there are moral standards we ought to obey, even though the Mormon worldview that there are many gods is false. Again, this is not established, they're just making this statement. This last point about Mormonism raises a question, namely, why does the existence of a theistic or monotheistic God disprove polytheism? Okay, great. Let's get into that. It disproves polytheism because God is infinite and therefore cannot be more than one infinite being. While I disagree that they came to the correct conclusion that God must be infinite, because it just doesn't have to be. The analogy that I gave was somebody could create a video game and be separate from that video game's time and space. So they're outside of that time and space, but they themselves are not infinite in anything, infinite in perfect knowledge or infinite in perfection, infinite in their living, their life, right? So this doesn't really make any sense. But if there is an infinite being, if we just agree with their conclusion that there is an infinite being, does this mean that we cannot have multiple gods? So let's see what they're saying. To distinguish one being from another, they must differ in some way. If they differ in some way, then one lacks something the other one has. If one lacks something because the other one has, then lacking being is not infinite, because an infinite being by definition lacks nothing. So there can only be one infinite being. So they just defined God, this type of God, into existence, right? Because an infinite being by definition, what would that even look like? Whose definition? I mean, when I think of an infinite being, I think of a being that has an infinite lifespan. I don't think about infinite in other things, like an infinitely huge appetite or something, right? And they also say that God can't contradict himself, so the idea of can God microwave a burrito so hot that even he couldn't eat it, that's not a question we can really ask. So if there's a being that's infinite in its ability to create, that does not mean that we can't also have a being that's infinite in its ability to destroy, like Shiva the Destroyer. So, yeah, I don't know. They're really just making it up as they go along, aren't they? They didn't establish any of this. They didn't establish what an infinite being must be. So when they say infinite being by definition, it's not even by their own established definition in the book. It's just what they think we would agree to as the reader when they just put by definition. So that's a bit odd. So I disagree that we've come to this conclusion, but then again, I would disagree with everything else. Now, one could argue that finite beings or gods exist, and they are more powerful than human beings. In fact, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all teach the existence of angels and demons. But that's not polytheism, which denies that there is a supreme, infinite, eternal being to whom all creatures owe their existence, and to whom all creatures are ultimately accountable. Well, I don't know. I think that the first or second commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? This assumes that other gods are in existence. It doesn't say for the first commandment that I am the only God and you must recognize that. It doesn't say that I alone am God and no other gods exist. The commandment is to not put other gods before Yahweh, which assumes other gods exist. Now, this type of Christian, because again, from my background, would argue that these gods are things like worldly things that we would worship as if to be a god, such as fame or money or something along those lines. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say you should prioritize God. You should prioritize me, Yahweh. It doesn't say that I alone receive your worship and nothing else can you focus on. It doesn't say that. It says you shall not have other gods before me. So, I don't know. I think that it would imply that other gods are possible to have ahead of Yahweh, which means that the Bible might be saying other gods exist. So, it's an argument that a lot of people have had about that particular commandment. Since theism is true, polytheism is just as false as atheism, pantheism, and all other non-theistic worldviews. But we digress. Well, did you even start? Did you even dig in? The main point is that the right box top for the universe shows a theistic God. That means only one of the three major world religions has made the cut of truth, either Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Now, logically, all of these theistic world religions cannot be true because they make mutually exclusive claims. Moreover, it could be that none of these world religions is completely true. Okay, I'm glad they included that. Maybe they know theism is right, but little else. That's possible. However, since we know that beyond a reasonable doubt that God exists and that he has the characteristics we've listed above, characteristics that include design, purpose, justice, and love, then we should expect him to reveal more of himself and his purpose for our lives. This would require that he communicate with us. One of the three major theistic religions is likely to contain that communication. Again, I don't know why they're limiting it to the three major theistic religions. I don't know why. What if it's a minor theistic or monotheistic religion? I'm not sure. So again, miracles. Hopefully we'll get into this in the second part because that's the hope, right? It looks like the screen's cut off. Let me fix that. All right. How does God communicate? As we have seen, God has already communicated to us through creation and conscience, natural or general revelation, which gives us basic ideas about his existence, power, and moral requirements. But how could God reveal himself so that we could get a more detailed understanding of what his ultimate purpose for us is? This better be where the miracles come in. Why couldn't he appear to each of us? Okay, yeah, why not? He could, but that might interfere with our free will. Well, wouldn't an infinite God know the way to do it that doesn't interfere with our free will? I mean, isn't the idea in Christianity that Lucifer knows God and still rejected him? So that doesn't make sense. C.S. Lewis has some great insights on this topic. In his Screwtape Letters, Screwtape, the senior demon, writes the following to his disciple, Wormwood. You must have wondered why the enemy, God, does not make more use of his power to be sensibly present to human souls in any degree he chooses and at any moment. But now you see that the irresistible and indisputable are the two weapons of which the very nature of his scheme forbids him to use. Merely to override a human will as his felt presence in any but the faintest and most mitigated degree would certainly do, would be for him useless. He cannot ravish, he can only woo. I don't know, I want to say I don't know why they keep using C.S. Lewis, but I do know why. It's because it's something that just feels like it fits. It's nothing that we can demonstrate. It's not any serious theologian or a serious philosopher. It's a guy who believed that ghosts were real, and when Houdini commented that he's not on board, he and his wife cut Houdini out of their lives. I mean, this is not a guy that's super reasonable. Also, I wonder, are they even going to mention the thing about ghosts and how the Lewises were doing, what were they doing, seances? That C.S. Lewis's wife was, she tried to hold these seances to communicate with the dead. Are they going to bring this up? Because C.S. Lewis was, absolutely on board with this, so they just keep seeming to quote him. May as well just tell us to go read the Screwtape Letters because they keep quoting it. If God has not chosen the overpowering option of face-to-face interactions with every person on the planet, then perhaps he has chosen a more subtle method of communication. But again, why? Why? If that's what he demands is our worship and he wants us to be with him and all this other stuff, why? Perhaps God has manifested himself in some ways to select a group of people over many centuries and inspired them to write down what they witnessed and heard from him. Why would he? He knows that many people do not find that convincing, so why would he do that to convince many people? That doesn't make any sense. Written language is a precise medium of communication that can be easily duplicated and passed on to succeeding generations, yet it can also be easily ignored by those who freely decide that they don't want to be bothered with God. Well, we can still ignore God just because he shows up and says, hey, I'm real. We can still say, cool, no thanks. That's their whole argument about why people are atheists in the first place, that we know truly that God exists, but we reject him for some personal reason. So how would revealing himself to us in a more obvious way make us want to be with him, right? Why would we not reject God if we could definitely see he exists? Because they assume that we definitely know he exists. So how would this change it? The other thing this reminded me of is one of the reasons that I ended up leaving Christianity. Now, I still believed in some kind of God, but I left Christianity because one of the issues I had was I had to keep apologizing for God and trying to explain his actions. And I got really tired of that because I thought, if God is really as perfect and infinite and all of these characteristics that Christians believe he is, why do I have to keep explaining what he could have or really did or maybe might have meant when he said or did this terrible thing? And that's what I'm noticing here. Instead of saying we don't know, they're saying, well, let's just shoehorn something that we like. So we don't know why God isn't really showing himself to us. Maybe he just wanted to write it down, like the Bible we have and are trying to justify. So I got really tired of that as a Christian, and it was one of the reasons that I left Christianity. Not the only reason, but definitely a big one. I mean, if God is so perfect and knows everything in all times, why would he choose a book to be written in such a way that it can be so wildly and differently interpreted, discarded, that his actions, his statements can come across as so cruel or contradictory. Why would he make such a book? So a book would work as a valid but not overpowering means of communication by God. But even still, we're relying on somebody else's idea of what they think God meant, right? So we're not really getting communication from God. We're getting communication from people who interpreted God's actions, signs, etc. That's what we're getting. So anyway, they say the book is reasonable. Okay, why couldn't it be any other form of communication though? But whose book? Has God communicated through the book of the Jews, the book of the Christians, or the book of the Muslims, or the book of the Zoroastrians? How are we supposed to tell whose book, if any, is really a message from God? The next section is the King's Seal. In the days before mass communications, when all long-distance messages were sent by hand, a king would place his seal on the message. This seal would be a sign to the recipient of the message that the message was authentic. It really came from the king and not from someone else just posing as the king. Of course, to make this system work, the seal needed to be unusual or unique, easily recognizable, and it had to be something only the king possessed. Now we can definitely see where they're going here, and I think it's a nice analogy, but we can also remember that counterfeiting exists. God could use a similar system to authenticate his messages. Specifically, he could use miracles. Oh boy. That's not what this is not what I was expecting. So I guess kudos to the authors for giving us something that was interesting and unusual. But miracles, okay. Miracles are unusual and unique, easily recognizable, and only God can do them. That is a big, wow. That's a big one. Even skeptics, by demanding a sign from God, are implicitly admitting that miracles would prove his existence. Well, again, we have to define what is a miracle. So are they going to define... Okay, perfect. What is a miracle? Great. A miracle is a special act of God. Okay, the end. Right? The end. They're saying miracles can only be created by God. So it's not a special act of... It's not a special act of God... Or sorry... Let me finish the sentence. A miracle is a special act of God that interrupts the normal course of events. So they're not saying a miracle is any event that goes against the natural course of events or nature's order or anything like that we could then attribute to God. They're saying that a miracle must be an act of God. So by the definition of miracle that they've put forth, it can only be created by God. This is what I meant by they're defining their God into existence. This idea that by demanding a sign from God, skeptics are implicitly admitting that miracles would prove his existence, I'm admitting that God interacting with me would prove his existence. I'm not asking for him to halt time. I'm asking for him to show me some kind of evidence. That evidence could be taking me outside of the universe or something. Would that be a miracle? I don't know. I mean, if that's something that God can do, then it's not something that I would consider unusual. We're just going within God's own ability. So even this definition just doesn't work. Anyway, atheist Antony Flew put it well. A miracle is something which would never have happened had nature, as it were, been left to its own devices. Okay, so then why not use that? Why smuggle in God? So we might say that natural laws describe what happens regularly by natural causes. Miracles, if they occur at all, describe what happens rarely by supernatural causes. The biggest problem I'm going to see here is that thing about counterfeiting that I mentioned. This idea that I can create the king's seal and use it to make it look like the king is saying something. And in the same way, since we're only doing things by the written word, by human hand, then somebody could just write a miracle or write an event down that other people would say is a miracle. So how are we going to confirm these miracles happened? Let's find out. Through miracles, God could tell the world which book or which person speaks for him. I still have trouble with that idea, though, that God would need somebody to speak for him. This phrase I keep using for Muslims, and for some reason it's Muslim specifically, I don't know why, but there's some comments that they make, and I end up having to say, well, if Allah wants to meet with me, then he doesn't need... If Allah really wants my attention, he doesn't need you to get it. That kind of phrasing. So, if God wants to send a message, why does he have to send a message through Muhammad? Why can't he send it through me, to me, through me? Why does he have to send it through Paul, right? So he could pour out miracles through that person. Why not pour out miracles through me? Why not fix my discs? How about that? That's a good start. That would be really cool. If God actually works in this way, then a miracle confirms the message and a sign confirms the sermon. So again, we got to verify the miracle. Or to put it in another way, a miracle is an act of God to confirm the word of God through a messenger of God. So again, we have defined it this way. The question is, does God work that way? Does the King of the universe use such signs? Are miracles even possible? Our secular world says no. As we're about to see, they are seriously mistaken. I really am interested in how they're going to do this without using religious texts. Is the box open or closed? On a recent trip to Russia to speak to Russian educators, seminary professor Ronald Nash had a big challenge. He wanted to talk to them about God, but he knew he couldn't get anywhere with them unless he could overcome their long-held biases against theism. Wow. So it's just, I mean, that's kind of a, well, I guess he's a seminary professor. We don't know what kind of Russian educators, maybe they're Russian seminary educators. It just seemed a bit odd that someone is going to speak to Russian educators, which we're assuming are secular, and his first major concern is how can I evangelize to them? For more than 70 years, Russians have been taught a worldview that ruled out God in advance. Their official state religion was atheism. We'll just leave it there. And the atheistic worldview asserts that only the natural material world exists. According to atheists, miracles are impossible because there is no supernatural realm. To believe otherwise is to believe in fairy tales. Well, I mean, even the thing I didn't understand about supernatural when I was a Christian is that God is not only the creator of nature, but he's part of existence, right? He doesn't exist he doesn't exist outside of existence, okay? He exists perhaps on more planes than our existence, maybe other dimensions or something, but he exists. And because he exists, does that mean that anything he does is part of the natural world because God is part of our existence? Because this idea of supernatural, it gives this sense that it has to be something outside of nature, outside of existence. But if God is within existence, then everything he does should be a natural occurrence. So even as a Christian, I don't know if I would necessarily agree with this statement. Nash began by showing them two small cardboard boxes. One was open and one was closed. Here is the difference between your worldview and mine, he began. Pointing to the closed box, he said, you believe that the physical universe is closed, that the universe is all that exists, and that there's nothing outside it. Shifting to the open box, he continued, I believe that the physical universe exists as well, but I also believe it is open, that there's something outside of the universe we call God. Nash paused and added, and God created the box. Not very convincing. He then reached into the open box and said, just like I can reach into this box and manipulate its contents, God can reach into our universe and perform what we call miracles. So again, I don't know if it's a miracle, if God is, is it supernatural if God's doing it in our natural world and God is part of existence? I don't know. Anyway, for some reason, this was a profound illustration to the Russians. Yeah, I agree with the authors here, because for some reason, because I don't know, doesn't seem very profound to me. Light bulbs began coming on in the minds of educators all over the room. These educators had assumed their naturalistic worldview was correct and had considered no other alternatives. How do they know this? This is a really bizarre way to paint these guys as these one-dimensional characters for the purposes of telling a story. That's it, isn't it? We don't have any way to even show that this really did happen. It just comes off as a story they've created for the purposes of illustrating their point. Nash helped them think that maybe another alternative like theism had better evidence. How did he help them think this? All he said is that, I believe there's a God who can affect the contents of the box. How does this say, oh wow, you know what, he's right. Gosh, well why didn't we think of that? Wow, okay. Nobody said, can you show us any reason to believe this? They all just said, wow, yeah, okay. It reminds me very much of those stories they would tell in the pulpit, that there would be a Christian student praying openly for their classroom and the whole of the class fell on their faces weeping and confessing their sins to God, the teacher declaring God is real and crying out to Jesus Christ and everything, all because this one student, because I tested that. I put my faith out there and I did stuff like that and it never happened. Which, of course, as a Christian, you blame yourself. Maybe my faith is wrong, and am I praying for my own gain? And no, I'm not. I really wanted my classmates to find Jesus and go to heaven, and I really wanted to help them get to heaven. So it wasn't something I was doing for my own glory. I wanted to glorify God. And yet, all the things that I was promised were the case never happened. So this just really reads like that. As we have seen in chapters 3 through 7, theism does have better evidence. We have not seen that. We know beyond a reasonable doubt that a theistic God exists. Since God exists, the universe represented by the closed box is false. So again, this is all, we've just defined this to be this way. The box is opened and was created by God, so it is possible for God to intervene in the natural world by performing miracles. In fact, miracles are not only possible, miracles are actual, because the greatest miracle of all, the creation of the universe out of nothing, has already occurred. So with that regard to the Bible, if Genesis 1:1 is true, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, then every other miracle in the Bible is easy to believe. That's it? That's it. That's their response to my question that I asked a few minutes earlier about how are they going to demonstrate that the miracles, or verify the miracles that are written down in these texts even happened. That's their evidence, because if the first verse of Genesis is true, then everything else written in the Bible is true. Now notice it says the Bible, not the Torah, not the Quran. They say similar, that God created everything, right? And in fact, Genesis is not from Christianity. You know, Christianity came after Judaism, right? So Genesis is a Jewish concept. So why is every other miracle in the Bible easy to believe? These guys are really telling on themselves. You know what I mean? They're not saying every other miracle written thereafter is easy to believe. It's only the Bible, because they want to prove the Bible is true. So all they're doing is just proving that I've got their number. Can a God who created the entire universe out of nothing part the Red Sea, bring fire down from heaven, keep a man safe in a great fish for 3 days, accurately predict future events, turn water into wine, heal diseases instantaneously, raise the dead? Of course. All of those miraculous events are simple tasks for an infinitely powerful being who created the universe in the first place. Wow. We've decided God is infinite and he can do whatever he wants, because that's how we've decided what infinite means. We've decided that Genesis 1:1 is correct, therefore God can do all things. Therefore miracles have happened, because we know God could do them, because we've decided God could do them. Therefore everything written in the Bible that is a miracle, that is correct. But not the Quran, and not the Torah, but the Bible specifically. It's just such a... If a student turned this in as an essay and wrote anything like this as a conclusion, that we can trust what this author wrote about because one thing they wrote about I think feels true, I would just say, sorry, you got to try again. This is not convincing. You need to use actual evidence to demonstrate what you're trying to say. Oh boy. Oh boy. Now this doesn't mean that God has performed. Okay, good. Okay, at least they're getting there. That remains to be seen, and only means he could have, that such miracles are possible. In light of the fact that we live in a theistic universe, ruling out miracles beforehand, as many atheists do, is clearly illegitimate. As C.S. Lewis put it, if we admit God, must we admit miracle? Indeed, indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain. So, why do so many people today say that miracles are not possible or should not be believed? How can skeptics disbelieve in miracles when the whole universe appears to be one amazing miracle? Well, that's it. You phrased it there exactly correctly. You believe the miracle, or that the universe feels like it's a miracle, so how can anyone deny that it is a miracle because it feels like a miracle to me? Thank you for telling on yourselves, guys. We need to address those questions before we can investigate whether God has confirmed the truth of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam through miracles. Seeing the length of this video and checking just how many pages are left, I'm going to go ahead and stop chapter 8 here. I wish that we didn't waste so much time with the authors just kind of not really explaining anything on topic. You know, this is supposed to be about miracles. They've already decided that Christianity is true. And I wish there would have been some other chapter that really ruled out their other types of theism. I don't think they did a good job with this, and I don't think they gave any real justification for why they only are focusing on the 3 major monotheistic religions. It just seemed to be rushed, dropped on us, and then a few pages later, okay, now we're going to talk about miracles. So I wish they would have given that a bit more thought, and I'm surprised they haven't, because they've really gone into detail about things that they really didn't need to. But this, I think, was something they should have talked about in a full chapter, and I feel like maybe there was a reason they didn't, you know? Sometimes if you start trying to make an argument in an essay and you realize it's actually not that strong of an argument because easy counter arguments can be made against it, rather than trying to explain why it's still a viable argument and how we can address those counter arguments, we can just delete that portion of the essay. So I wonder if something like that happened. It's of course just speculative, but I do wonder if something like that happened, that as they tried to rule out different religions, they realized we could easily use those arguments against Christianity. So, I don't know. We'll see, and that's all I got for you guys today. If you want to check out the details section, there's different ways to contact me, including our Discord channel and Patreon, where you can help me afford medication to deal with the migraines that are caused by this book. And of course, caffeine to keep me focused as well. So just for as little as $1 a day, and you can also join as a free member and just get some extra bonus content. Otherwise, feel free to make as many comments as you guys like. I love it when you post a bunch of different comments as opposed to one big comment. Not only does that help the algorithm, but it also is a little bit easier to reply to, so these don't turn into full-length, huge kind of text back and forth. So I do appreciate them. Feel free to leave as many of them as you like. And as always, guys, thanks for listening.